When the town of Harmony Creek voted to ban the annual biker rally, they thought they were protecting their peace. They thought they were drawing a line against chaos. But when the river broke its banks and that peace was shattered by the roar of surging floodwaters, it was a single phone call from a man they had outlawed that set off a chain of events that would change everything. 400 Hells Angels, the very men the town had rejected, turned their motorcycles toward the disaster zone, not for a rally, but for a rescue that would redefine the meaning of community and heroism for every soul in that drowning town. The town of Harmony Creek was a postcard. It was nestled in a gentle valley, cradled by green hills and bisected by a river that usually ambled along like a lazy serpent. Its main street was lined with century-old brick buildings, housing an antique shop, a bakery that puffed clouds of sugary air out its doors each morning, and a hardware store where the owner knew everyone by name. Lawns were manicured with surgical precision. White picket fences stood as symbols of a quiet, orderly existence. Harmony Creek prized its tranquility above all else. It was a town governed by tradition and an unspoken code of polite, predictable conduct. This code was championed by Mayor Thompson, a man whose crisp suits and severe haircut seemed to reflect the town's own rigid values. He had built his political career on the promise of preserving the town's pristine character, a character he felt was under constant threat from the outside world. The biggest perceived threat, in the mayor's opinion, was the annual motorcycle rally. For years, a loose coalition of clubs had used the county park on the edge of town as a staging ground for a weekend gathering. It brought noise, traffic, and a brand of rugged individualism that made the town council deeply uncomfortable. They saw leather and tattoos and heard the thunder of engines, and they translated it all into a single word: trouble. So they had voted. In a town hall meeting filled with nodding heads and murmurs of agreement, they had unanimously passed an ordinance. It banned organized gatherings of more than 20 motorcycles within town limits. It was, for all intents and purposes, a direct prohibition aimed at one group. The message was clear: you are not welcome here. Miles away, a man known as Styx read the news of the ban online and just shook his head. His real name was David Chen, but few in his circle used it. At 42, he was a road captain for his Hells Angels chapter, a position he earned through quiet competence and an unnerving ability to see 3 steps ahead. He didn't look like a master logistician. He was tall and lanky, a frame draped in worn denim and leather. His arms were a tapestry of ink, telling stories of his time in the Marines, of brotherhood, of loss. The road name Styx came partly from his lean build and partly from a past life where he'd been a drummer in a band, a rhythm still living in the precise, deliberate way he moved. His past as a logistics specialist in the Corps had never truly left him. He saw the world in terms of supply lines, personnel, and objectives. It was a skill that made him invaluable to his club, and it gave him a perspective that saw past the surface of things. He saw the Harmony Creek ban not as an insult, but as a failure of imagination on the town's part. They saw a stereotype, not a group of men who were veterans, fathers, and mechanics. He didn't dwell on it. There were other places to ride, other towns that didn't look at them like an invading army, but he remembered the name: Harmony Creek, a place that wanted peace so badly it was willing to build a wall around itself. Then the storm came. It wasn't a normal storm. It was a meteorological monster, a system that stalled over the valley and dumped a season's worth of rain in 2 days. The lazy river that bisected the town turned into a raging brown beast. It chewed at its banks, then devoured them. The first flood sirens were a novelty. Then they became a warning. Then they became a desperate, wailing cry that was soon drowned out by the roar of the water. Harmony Creek was going under. Styx was at the clubhouse with 24 of his brothers. The place smelled of old leather, motor oil, and stale beer. A television in the corner, usually showing a game or a movie, was tuned to a news channel. The screen was filled with images of a town he recognized. He saw manicured lawns submerged under churning, muddy water. He saw the quaint Main Street transformed into a canal of debris. He saw familiar-looking picket fences bobbing in the current, torn from the ground they were meant to protect. He saw fear. He knew what a disaster looked like. He had seen it in war zones, in the chaotic aftermath of battle. He recognized the patterns of failure. The news anchor spoke of overwhelmed first responders. The fire department's single rescue boat had been swamped. The main roads were washed out, cutting the town off from the heavy equipment and manpower of the state's emergency services. The reporter on the ground was standing on a patch of high ground, the wind whipping her hair. Behind her, a family was huddled on the roof of their half-submerged home. The camera zoomed in on a woman clutching a small child, her face a mask of terror. She was screaming something at the reporter, but the wind stole her words. Then, the reporter's voice cut through the noise. "Officials are saying they simply can't get to everyone," she said, her voice strained. "The roads are impassable for fire trucks and ambulances. They need smaller, more maneuverable ways to reach these trapped residents. But for now, hundreds of people are on their own." That was the signal. The words hit Styx with the force of a physical blow. Smaller, more maneuverable ways. A cold clarity washed over him, silencing the noise of the clubhouse and the storm on the screen. He looked at the bikes parked outside. He thought of their ability to weave through stalled traffic, to navigate broken pavement, to go where cars and trucks could not. He saw a logistical problem that had a clear, immediate solution. He saw men and women and children trapped on rooftops. He saw a town that had scorned them, a town that was now dying because the very order it cherished had collapsed. The irony was bitter, but it was overshadowed by a far more powerful feeling, a sense of duty. His blood went cold, not with fear, but with purpose. His instincts, honed in the deserts of Afghanistan and on 1,000 miles of blacktop, flared to life. This was not a choice, it was a mission. He stood up. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to him. He walked over to the television and turned it off. The sudden quiet was heavy. "They're cut off," he said, his voice flat and steady. "The roads are gone. They can't get heavy vehicles in." He turned to face his chapter president, a burly man named Bear, whose fists were as big as cinder blocks. Styx didn't wait for a question. He presented a plan. "Our bikes can get through," he said. "We can ride the shoulders, get through the gaps. We can carry supplies. We can run reconnaissance and find the people who are cut off. We have chainsaws. We have ropes. We have 24 men right here who know how to work in chaos." Bear stared at him, his expression unreadable. "That's the town that banned us, Styx." "They're not banning anyone today," Styx replied, his gaze unwavering. "Today, they're just people in the water." The decision was made in that silence. It was a split-second choice, a commitment made without debate. The risk was enormous. They could be arrested. They could be blamed for getting in the way. They could be wrong. But the risk of doing nothing was a far greater weight. The image of the mother on the roof was burned into his mind. Bear gave a single, decisive nod. "Make the calls." That was all Styx needed. He pulled out his phone. His fingers flew across the screen, tapping out messages, making calls to the presidents of other chapters. Not just Hell's Angels, but allied clubs across the region. The message was simple. Harmony Creek is drowning. The state can't get in. We can. Bring chainsaws, ropes, medical supplies, and anything that floats. Meet at the county line, Highway 54. There were no questions. There was no hesitation. The Brotherhood was a current stronger than any flood. Within an hour, the response was a roar. From every direction, engines fired to life. A river of steel and chrome began to flow, converging on a single point on the map. They were a force of nature answering another. By the time they reached the rendezvous point, their numbers had swelled to nearly 400. It was a stunning display of solidarity and speed. They looked like an army, clad in leather and denim, their faces set with grim determination. Styx stood before them, a map of the area spread across the hood of a pickup truck. He laid out the operation with military precision. He divided them into teams: search and rescue, supply runners, debris clearing, a medical team composed of former combat medics and EMTs. He designated rally points on high ground within the town. He established a simple communication system using hand signals and runners. He was no longer just a biker, he was a commander in the field. They rolled out from the county line in a staggered formation, a thunderous column moving with a singular purpose. As they neared the edge of Harmony Creek, they were met with a single, flashing set of blue and red lights. A lone sheriff's deputy stood beside his cruiser, which was parked sideways, blocking what was left of the road. The deputy was young, his face pale and strained. He held up a hand, a gesture that was both authoritative and deeply uncertain. Bear, at the head of the column, rolled to a stop. The rumble of 400 engines dropped to a low, menacing idle. "The town is closed," the deputy yelled over the noise. "State of emergency. Nobody gets in." Bear looked down at the young man. He didn't dismount. He just pointed a gloved finger toward the flooded valley behind him. "We hear you got people on roofs." "We have it under control," the deputy insisted, though the tremor in his voice betrayed the lie. Sticks pulled his bike up alongside Bear's. He looked the deputy in the eye. "Son," he said, his voice calm and reasonable, "your town council banned us from having a party. We're not here for a party. We're here to work. You can stand there and try to stop us, and we'll go around you. Or you can tell us where the worst of it is, and we can save some lives. Your choice." The deputy stared at the endless line of bikers behind them. He saw the chainsaws strapped to sissy bars, the bundles of ropes, the determined faces. He saw an asset, not a threat. His shoulders slumped in defeat and relief. He stepped aside. "The elementary school," he said, his voice cracking. "They were using it as an evacuation center, but the creek behind it crested. They're cut off. Last I heard, there were at least 50 people in there, mostly kids." Sticks nodded. He turned to his men. "Alpha Team, you heard him. You're on the school. Go." The first group peeled off, their engines screaming as they navigated the flooded, broken pavement. The intervention had begun. It was no longer a plan. It was an unfolding reality. The town was a maze of destruction. The bikers fanned out, their loud pipes ironically becoming beacons of hope in the chaos. They were a swarm of loud, leather-clad angels moving through the wreckage. Sticks established a command post on a small hill overlooking the town, using his truck's radio and a team of runners to coordinate the sprawling operation. From his vantage point, he could see the sheer scale of the disaster and the incredible effectiveness of his impromptu rescue force. His men were fearless and resourceful. They formed human chains to guide elderly residents through waist-deep currents. They used their bikes to ferry exhausted firefighters from one crisis to another. Two bikers, former lumberjacks, fired up their chainsaws and cut a path through a massive fallen oak that had trapped a dozen cars on a collapsing bridge, allowing the people inside to escape just moments before the structure gave way. The team sent to the elementary school found a scene of rising panic. The water was already seeping into the gymnasium, where terrified parents and crying children were huddled. The bikers didn't hesitate. They formed a living bridge, standing shoulder to shoulder in the churning water that was now chest deep, passing children from one set of strong, tattooed arms to the next, until every single one was on higher ground. Meanwhile, another team followed a barely audible cry for help. They found the family from the news report. The mother was weak with hypothermia, her child wrapped in her arms. The bikers got a rope over the roof, secured the child in a makeshift harness, and brought them both down to the relative safety of a waiting boat. A small aluminum fishing boat one of the bikers had inexplicably towed all the way there. Inside the town's emergency operations center, located in the one municipal building on high ground, Mayor Thompson watched the reports come in. At first, he was furious. It was an invasion, a violation of his ordinance. He ordered the sheriff to arrest them. The sheriff, a weary man named Miller, just shook his head. "With what, John? My 3 deputies? Those men, the ones you banned, they just evacuated the entire elementary school. They've rescued at least 30 families that we couldn't even get to. They're not the problem right now. They're the solution." The mayor was speechless. He watched the grainy drone footage on the screen. He saw the bikers, the symbols of everything he feared, working with a discipline and courage that humbled him. He saw them handing out their own water, sharing their own food, wrapping their leather jackets around shivering children. They were not marauders, they were saviors. The climax of the rescue effort came at dawn. The rain had stopped, but a critical dam upstream was showing signs of failure. If it broke, a second, more violent wave would scour the valley clean. The only way to relieve the pressure was to manually open a spillway gate, but the access road was under 10 feet of water and blocked by a rock slide. Sticks got the call on the sheriff's radio. He looked at the map, then at the hill where the spillway controls were located. There was no road, but there was a narrow, winding deer trail up the back of the ridge. It was steep, muddy, and treacherous. It was impossible for a four-wheeled vehicle, but not for a dirt bike. Among the bikers was a small group of younger members, guys who spent their weekends racing motocross. Styx found them. "I need 3 volunteers," he said, pointing to the ridge. "The spillway controls are at the top. The engineers will walk you through it on the radio. If you don't get that gate open, none of this matters." 3 young men stepped forward without a word. They were on their bikes in seconds, engines screaming as they hit the trail. The entire town's fate rested on their skill. They fought their way up the muddy slope, bikes sliding, engines straining. One of them went down hard, but the other 2 pressed on. They reached the top, caked in mud and exhausted, and with shaking hands, followed the frantic instructions coming over the radio. A low groan echoed across the valley as the massive steel gate began to open. A torrent of water erupted from the spillway, diverting the pressure. The dam held. The second wave never came. The threat was neutralized. As the sun rose higher, the water levels slowly began to recede. The roar of the flood was replaced by a stunned, exhausted silence. The bikers, covered in mud and grime, began to consolidate at their rally points. They were bone-tired, but they were not done. They started the cleanup, pulling debris from the streets, checking on houses, and offering help to anyone who needed it. Sheriff Miller found Styx at his makeshift command post. He walked right up to him and extended a hand. "I don't know what to say," the sheriff said, his voice thick with emotion. "You and your men, you saved us." Styx just nodded, too tired to say much more. Validation wasn't why he had come, but the most powerful validation came from the townspeople. As they emerged from their battered homes, they didn't see menacing outlaws. They saw the faces of the men who had carried their children to safety. A woman whose husband was a diabetic approached a massive biker with a shaved head and a fearsome scowl. She explained that his insulin had been washed away. Without a word, the biker got on his radio. 20 minutes later, another rider roared up, a small cooler bag strapped to his bike. He had driven to a pharmacy in the next county over. The mother from the roof found the 2 men who had pulled her and her son to safety. She couldn't speak. She just hugged them, tears streaming down her face, her small son clinging to her leg. The bikers, men who cultivated an image of toughness, looked down at their boots, their own emotions too raw to hide. Mayor Thompson finally came down from the EOC. He walked through the mud and debris, his crisp suit now rumpled and stained. He found Styx leaning against his truck, cleaning mud from a chainsaw. The mayor stopped in front of him. For a long moment, he said nothing. He just looked at the biker, then at the quiet, efficient work happening all around him. "I was wrong," the mayor said, his voice barely a whisper. "I was wrong about you, about all of you. You saved my town." He cleared his throat, his pride warring with a profound sense of gratitude. "Thank you." Styx finished cleaning the chain, his movements deliberate. He finally looked up at the mayor. "People were in the water, man," he said simply. "That's all that mattered." The bikers stayed for 2 more days, working alongside the residents and the arriving National Guard troops. They never asked for thanks or payment. When the main roads were finally cleared and their work was done, they gathered in the same disciplined column. And then, with a final thunderous roar that now sounded like a salute, they were gone. 1 year passed. Harmony Creek was still healing. The flood had left deep scars on the landscape and on the hearts of its people. But something else had been born in the disaster. A new sense of community, one forged in shared trauma and unexpected grace. The town council was in session. The chamber was packed. Mayor Thompson stood at the podium, looking older and far less severe than he had a year ago. "The first item on our agenda," he announced, his voice steady, "is to formally and permanently rescind Ordinance 734, the ban on motorcycle gatherings." A wave of applause filled the room. "But we need to do more than that," he continued. He gestured to the main doors. They swung open, and Styx, Bear, and a half-dozen other bikers walked in. They were in their clean, formal club vests, but they moved with the same quiet confidence they'd had in the flood. They stood before the council as the mayor made his proposal. He proposed that the town of Harmony Creek officially invite the Hells Angels and their associated clubs to hold their annual rally in the town. Not just a rally, but a new tradition. The Harmony Creek Flood Run, to be held on the anniversary of the flood. It would be a day of remembrance, a celebration of survival, and a fundraiser for disaster preparedness programs across the state. The vote was unanimous. The first flood run was an event unlike any other. Hundreds of bikers rumbled down the rebuilt Main Street, not to the fear of the residents, but to their cheers. Families lined the sidewalks, holding signs that said, "Thank you, Angels." Children waved from their parents' shoulders. The bikers didn't just party. They organized a charity auction. They ran a blood drive. They worked with the local Lions Club on a pancake breakfast. The line between the townspeople and the bikers blurred, then disappeared altogether. They were just people, sharing a meal, sharing a memory. Sticks found himself standing on the new bridge that spanned the now peaceful river. Mayor Thompson stood beside him, watching the scene below. Bikers were giving kids rides around the park. Town elders were sitting at picnic tables, listening intently as a grizzled old rider told a story. "I judged a book by its cover," the mayor said quietly, not looking at Sticks. "And it almost cost us everything. I saw the leather and the noise, and I didn't see the men inside." Sticks watched as the little boy who had been rescued from the roof, now a year older and bolder, ran up to the huge biker named Bear and handed him a dandelion. Bear, the fearsome chapter president, took the flower with surprising gentleness and tucked it into the pocket of his vest. The biker didn't need to say anything. The scene below said it all. It was a testament to a simple, powerful truth: that courage is not defined by a uniform or a title, that community is not built on fences and rules, but on hands reaching out in the dark, and that sometimes the most profound help comes from the most unexpected places, riding in on a wave of thunder and chrome, not to break the peace, but to restore it.